You ever have one of those neighbors who just takes entitled to a whole new level? Well, let me tell you about the time my HOA's self-proclaimed queen, let's just call her Karen, decided my private backyard pool was suddenly available for her summer party. No joke. Out of nowhere, she marched up to my door, sunglasses on, clipboard in hand, and told me, "The HOA would like to use your pool for our annual gathering this weekend," like it was some community fountain or public park. And just like that, she expected I'd roll out the red carpet, clean everything up, and hand over my backyard like a rental space without even asking, let alone offering anything in return. Now, to be clear, this wasn't some shared community pool. This was my personal property, behind a locked gate, on land I own, paid for, maintain, and actually use. But Karen didn't care. She went on about community spirit and how I should be proud to offer up my space. Proud? I was floored. And when I calmly said no, she didn't take it well. That's when the weirdness began. Flyers got posted around the neighborhood saying the event was happening at the usual pool location, meaning mine. Neighbors started texting me, asking what time the party started. I was stunned. She'd announced it without my permission. I had a choice. Let her walk all over me or make it crystal clear that this wasn't going to fly. So I did something a little dramatic. Okay, maybe very dramatic. The day before the supposed community pool party, I went outside, turned the valve, and drained every last drop of water from that pool. What happened next? Let's just say it didn't sit well with Karen. And the next knock on my door, it wasn't from a neighbor, it was from the cops. Stick around, because this story gets way more ridiculous than you'd believe. Asterisk. So there I was, standing in my empty backyard, staring at a drained pool that just 24 hours earlier had been completely full and summer ready. And honestly, I wasn't even my die was amused. I figured Karen would finally get the hint and back off. But no. That woman does not take no for an answer, especially when she's already printed flyers and told everyone she'd be hosting the biggest HOA event of the season. I don't know if it was pride, control, or just pure stubbornness, but the next morning, she was back at my door. Fuming, she was holding her phone up like it was evidence in a courtroom. You drained the pool on purpose. Do you understand? How disrespectful that is to this community. I just stared at her. Disrespectful. For not allowing people to swarm my yard and wreck my weekend. She claimed I was setting a bad example and even accused me of sabotaging neighborhood unity. It was like I'd committed some unforgivable crime against suburbia. Then came the cherry on top. About 10 minutes later, a police cruiser slowly pulled up to the curb outside my house. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence. Maybe someone reported a noise or something minor. But no, it was about the pool. Karen had called the cops on me for draining my own pool. The officer was polite, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. But he said he had to respond since a complaint had been filed. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Karen actually tried to claim I was endangering the neighborhood by having a dry pool during an HOA event. Like that was even a thing. And while I tried to explain everything calmly, Karen stood behind the officer, arms crossed, smirking like she'd won something. But little did she know, things were just getting started. The officer stood there, notebook in hand, clearly trying to make sense of the situation. I could tell he was used to actual emergencies, not HOA drama over a drained pool. I explained everything: how Karen never got permission, how the party was never agreed upon, and how this was my private backyard, not a community center. He nodded slowly, clearly seeing the absurdity, but kept his tone neutral. Meanwhile, Karen kept interjecting, tossing in phrases like neighborhood obligations, hostile behavior, and my personal favorite, deliberate sabotage. At one point, she even said, "This is what happens when people don't want to be part of the community. I wanted to laugh, but I could feel my blood pressure rising. The officer eventually said, "Ma'am, this doesn't appear to be a police matter," which should have ended it. But Karen wasn't backing down. She told him she was escalating the complaint to the HOA board and hinted she'd be filing a formal grievance. That's when things started to spiral. Later that evening, started getting cold stares from a few neighbors I'd never had issues with before. One even asked, "Why didn't you just let them use the pool? It's only one day." Turns out, Karen had already begun spinning the story. She told people I'd ruined a long-standing tradition and purposely created division. Some folks, probably just wanting to avoid drama, started siding with her without knowing the full story. And just when I thought it couldn't get more ridiculous, I got a letter from the HOA the next day. It wasn't a fine, but it was a warning, something about failing to cooperate with community events. I couldn't believe it. The HOA was backing her, or at least pretending to keep the peace. That's when I realized this wasn't just about a pool. It was about power, control, and a neighborhood quietly turning into a battleground. I wasn't about to roll over, but I also knew this wasn't going to end with just a drained pool and a warning letter. Karen had started something, and I had a feeling she wasn't done yet. The days that followed felt like living in a pressure cooker. Every time I stepped outside, I could feel the shift. People who used to wave or chat with me at the mailbox now just gave polite nods or looked away entirely. It was subtle, but it was real. Karen's narrative was working. She convinced enough neighbors that I was the one causing problems, not her. And the HOA was completely silent after that warning letter, like they were waiting to see which side would break first. Then things got weirder. I noticed Karen walking by my house more than usual, always with her little notepad, pretending to be on some sort of official HOA business. One day, she even stopped outside my fence, peering through the slats like she was inspecting something. That same evening, I found a note taped to my door. No name, just a message scribbled in sharp black ink. "You don't belong here if you're not a team player." I stared at it for a long time, trying to decide if it was a threat or just another passive-aggressive move. Either way, it sent a chill through me. I started documenting everything just in case. Dates, times, photos, even the letter from the HOA. If Karen was planning something bigger, I wanted to be ready. And I had a feeling she was. Because a few days later, I overheard her talking loudly at the community park. She didn't see me behind the hedge, but I heard every word. If he thinks he can embarrass me like that and get away with it, he's got another thing coming. I've already contacted the regional board. The regional board. That's when it hit me. Karen was trying to escalate the issue beyond the local HOA. She wanted to make it official, bigger, and probably messier. Whatever she was planning, she was going all in. And as much as I hated the thought, I knew I couldn't just sit back anymore. This wasn't just neighborhood pettiness anymore. It was turning into a full-blown war over control, reputation, and the simple right to say no without being targeted. What I didn't know then was that Karen's next move would push everything right to the edge and force me to make a decision I never thought I'd have to make. Just when I thought I had a grasp on how far Karen was willing to go, something unexpected happened that completely changed the game. A letter arrived not from the HOA, not even from the regional board she'd threatened to contact. This one came certified, in a formal envelope with an attorney's office printed across the top. My stomach dropped before I even opened it. Inside was a notice claiming that I was in violation of community usage expectations, and that a formal mediation process had been requested on behalf of the HOA and 3 neighboring households. That's what stunned me the most. 3 of my own neighbors had apparently joined the complaint. People I'd had friendly conversations with just weeks ago were now siding with Karen. Either she'd convinced them I was the enemy, or they were too intimidated to go against her. Either way, it felt like betrayal. I reached out to one of them, a neighbor named Mark who lived just 2 houses down. He was always chill, used to borrow my ladder, even offered to help fix my fence once. When I asked him about the letter, his voice got awkward. He said, "Look, man, I didn't want to get involved, but Karen came by and said there'd be fines for anyone not supporting the HOA's event plan. I've got 2 kids, I couldn't risk it." That's when I realized Karen wasn't just playing dirty, she was using fear to control the narrative. But that wasn't even the worst part. That same evening, I found out from a friend on the HOA mailing list that Karen had submitted a proposal to the board, requesting the right to install a community access gate to my backyard pool area for future neighborhood events. I was speechless. She wasn't just trying to punish me, she was trying to take actual control of my property. At that point, it was no longer about parties or drained pools. Karen was trying to rewrite the rules and bully her way into ownership of something that didn't belong to her. And if the board approved her proposal, everything I had worked for could be at risk. I knew then that whatever she had planned next was only going to get uglier. The HOA meeting was packed. More people showed up than I'd ever seen before. Some clearly just curious, others clearly there for drama. I walked in with a folder full of documentation, photos, messages, HOA bylaws, even video clips from my security cam showing Karen snooping around my property. My hands were sweating, but I was ready. This wasn't just about the pool anymore. It was about setting a boundary once and for all. Karen was already seated near the front, dressed like she was chairing a board of directors, flipping through her own neatly labeled binder. She didn't even look my way. The president of the HOA called the meeting to order and opened the floor for special proposals. That's when Karen stood up and made her case. She spoke like a politician, talking about community traditions, underutilized resources, and how a shared pool area would boost neighborhood morale. She framed it like she was doing everyone a favor. When it was my turn, I stood, cleared my throat, and calmly laid out everything. I explained how Karen had never asked for permission, how she had publicly posted a party at my home without consent, and how I'd received threats and been isolated by neighbors based on false claims. I even read out loud the bylaw that clearly states the HOA has no authority over private property use unless it involves safety violations, which my drained pool obviously didn't. For the first time, room got quiet. Then came the twist. One of the newer board members, a woman named Denise who had just moved into the neighborhood a few months ago, raised her hand and asked Karen a direct question. "Did you tell people that the pool party had already been approved when it hadn't?" Karen paused, then stammered something about preliminary planning. That's when Denise pulled out a printed email thread, one that Karen had sent weeks ago, claiming I had agreed in writing to host the party. I hadn't. The email was completely made up. The room erupted. Now, people were murmuring, some visibly shocked. A few of the neighbors who'd signed the complaint looked genuinely uncomfortable. The HOA president called for a vote not on the pool proposal, but on launching a formal ethics review against Karen for misleading the board and the community. They voted, and it passed. Karen stood frozen, clutching her binder like it might protect her from the fallout. The proposal for the community gate denied permanently. The mediation canceled. I walked out of that meeting with my pool, my property rights, and a little more peace than I'd had in weeks. But just as I reached my driveway, I noticed something. A for sale sign quietly placed in Karen's yard overnight. No announcement. No farewell. She was leaving. Or maybe being pushed out quietly. Either way, the neighborhood would never be quite the same again. In the weeks after the HOA meeting, the tension in the neighborhood slowly started to fade. Without Karen patrolling the sidewalks with her clipboard, things felt lighter. A few neighbors even came by to apologize. Mark, the one who joined the complaint, showed up with a six-pack and said, "Man, I didn't know she was faking emails." That's next level. We ended up talking for over an hour, and it was the first time in a while that things felt normal again. Karen's house went up for sale quietly, with no open house or goodbye notes. Just one day, a moving truck showed up, and by sundown, she was gone. Word around the block was that the HOA board had encouraged her to resign and avoid a formal hearing. Whatever the reason, no one seemed too sad to see her go. As for me, I refilled the pool, added some new lights, and threw a small get-together for a few neighbors. No flyers, no drama, just a calm evening with music and snacks. It was more about reclaiming the space than anything else. A reminder that sometimes you have to stand your ground even when it feels like the entire block is against you. Looking back, the whole situation wasn't really about a pool. It was about boundaries, respect, and not letting someone else rewrite your story. Homeowners associations can serve a purpose, but they're not meant to be power trips and neighbors. They should be neighbors, not gatekeepers. So if you've ever dealt with an entitled HOA member or felt pressure to go along with something that didn't feel right, remember, your property is your space. And sometimes the quietest act of defiance, like draining a pool, says more than words ever could. Thanks for sticking around till the end.